Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to this Louie Tee Network exclusive on behalf of Bleacher Report, talking Washington Commanders 53-man roster. We're projecting this 53-man roster. It's very, very early, okay? But the fact that we're talking about a 53-man roster means we're dangerously close to the start of the NFL season. And boy, does that feel good. What a time to be alive. And there are going to be a lot of changes potentially to this list. I feel pretty good about the 53-man roster that I've put together here, but obviously the Commanders have only had 2 fully padded practices. They haven't had any joint practices, haven't had any preseason games. A lot of factors and variables will ultimately come into shaping and molding this roster, but I feel really good about what I've put together here. But I just wanted to throw out this caveat, understanding that there's a long way to go. A lot of summer left. A lot of things can transpire between now and when these 53-man rosters are finalized. But this is a fun exercise that we're probably going to go through multiple times before we get to the ultimate 53-man roster. But with that said, the Commanders have made a number of changes, a slew of changes. They've had the highest turnover rate of any team in the NFL from a roster standpoint. Over 60% of their roster has changed from a season ago. They just made a couple more changes just yesterday, getting rid of a couple of receivers, bringing in an extra kicker to compete with the kicker that they already had in-house, and also bringing in another receiver to help figure out the kicking situation in terms of kickoff return. So there's a lot of turnover with this roster. So a lot of things have changed. Let's dive into this roster, talk about what we think is going to happen here, and what the breakdown's going to be, where the numbers are. I'll give you my thought process behind the decisions that I've made and where I think this thing could ultimately change going into the final stretch of roster construction. So let's start with the offensive side of the football. As you can see, the offense is going to be made up of quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends and the offensive line. I've got 25 total. So generally, in a perfect world, and this is not usually how it works out, you want 25 on offense, 25 on defense, 3 specialists. There's your 53-man roster. But normally it's 26 and 24, 27 and 23. But I was able to construct a roster that was perfectly symmetrical, 25, 25, and 3. So I think this one isn't that hard for me. You start with the quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels and Marcus Mariota, to me, are your 2 quarterbacks. I don't think you need a third quarterback. There isn't a developmental quarterback that has to be on the roster. You're afraid if you expose him to the rest of the league, he's going to get snatched up. You didn't spend a draft pick on anyone other than Jaden Daniels here. So I think you can cut Jeff Driscoll, put him on the practice squad. If someone snatches him up, so be it. You can cut Sam Hartman, put him on the practice squad. I know they want to continue to work with Sam Hartman, and eventually he'll be the backup next year, is what you're hoping if you're the Commanders. So I think you don't have to waste a roster spot on a third quarterback. They could do that if they so choose, and I'll tell you how they can get to a third quarterback if they so choose as we go through this roster. But right now, for the purposes of this roster and how it's constructed, 2 quarterbacks gets the job done. You go to the running back position, and this is an interesting one because they could easily go with 4 running backs, and I wouldn't be shocked if this number is 4 when the final roster ultimately comes out. But right now, I don't think there's a need for 4 running backs, and I'll tell you why. I don't think it's the most talented position on the roster. There are other positions on this roster where you can devote an extra roster spot there because the competition is so great and the talent is so good at those particular positions. Running back is not one of them. So I don't think there's a need to keep a 4th running back at this time. You can put 2 extra running backs on the practice squad. If something were to happen to one of your running backs, you could easily pull up a running back that you like. I think they'll be able to do that with no problem with the guys that they currently have on the roster competing for spots. Don't think any of those guys are really going to find work elsewhere around the league. So I think it's pretty safe to say that you can get away with 3 and feel good about that. Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, of course, are your 2 backs that'll be sharing the backfield for the vast majority of the season. And then Chris Rodriguez Jr., a 6th-round pick from last year's draft out of Kentucky, continues to develop, and I think he rounds out the group as your 3rd running back. You get to the wide receiver position. This is one of the hot, debatable positions on this roster, among maybe 4 or 5 positions that I think are highly debatable in terms of the back end of these positions. I got 6 receivers making this roster. I think the number is going to be 6. I don't think they're going to keep 5. I don't think they're going to keep 7. I think the number is 6. And so I feel really comfortable about 4 of these guys, probably more like 5 of these guys. But for the sake of this discussion and in how I listed the players, for every position, for the most part, it's in order of how safe I believe they are on the roster in terms of them making the team. Like Terry McLaurin is definitely making this team, right? Brian Robinson Jr. definitely making this team. Jaden Daniels definitely making this team. And as you go on and on, the likelihood that they're cut increases. It may be a lot smaller of a percentage, but still. Terry McLaurin, a lock. Jahan Dotson, a lock. Luke McCaffrey, one of their 3rd-round selections, a lock. I think De'Ami Brown, a lot of people are questioning his roster spot. I think he's a lock. I don't see him going anywhere in the final year of his rookie contract. This is where it gets sketchy at the receiver position. These last 2 spots, I think, are very, very debatable and up for grabs for sure. Olamide Zaccheaus, I just feel like there's a comfort level with Olamide Zaccheaus, with Dan Quinn. He had him in Atlanta. They feel really good about him as a receiver. They feel really good about his versatility. He's played the running back position before. He's already a receiver that can contribute. They can also use him on special teams. I think he can return punts for you. I don't know if they feel comfortable with him being on kickoffs, but I think as a primary punt returner, I think they feel good about Olamide Zaccheaus, which is why you don't need Jamison Crowder. And so I think Olamide Zaccheaus offers you a number of things that make them feel comfortable, plus the fact that he was brought in here by Dan Quinn, a guy that he's very comfortable with. So I think Olamide Zaccheaus locks up the 5th wide receiver spot. And then this last one is very interesting because Byron Pringle was literally signed yesterday. But he played for the Commanders last season. Again, the staff was not here last season, but the wide receivers coach, Bobby Ingram, who I'm pretty sure they went to ask if Byron Pringle was a guy that he would be interested in having come back, probably co-signed Byron Pringle being re-signed here. They're looking for him to come in here and maybe help them with the kickoff return situation. They are really grasping at straws right now as to how they're going to handle kickoff return, which is why I think they bought Byron Pringle back. He can play wide receiver. He can play special teams. He's a core special teamer, a guy that can go down, run and make tackles, down the ball inside the 5-10 yard line, so forth and so forth. And then the biggest thing that they brought him in here to do is to return kicks. He's got experience in the NFL, has a career touchdown in the NFL returning kickoffs, and I think they want to see if he can help them there. If he can do all of those things, which he is fully capable of doing, I think he's going to lock up a roster spot. If he doesn't catch on to the playbook, if he doesn't separate himself in the kickoff return department, then this roster spot here is open to other players like Kaz Allen and, some other guys that may be able to flash and maybe steal this spot and make themselves a member of the Washington Commanders 53-man roster. But right now I'm looking at Byron Pringle, and I think they brought him here for a reason. He rounds out the wide receiver group. Tight end. This could easily be 3 tight ends. If they want to trim off fat, they could do it here, right? I think tight end is one of the essential positions, not only on this roster, but I also believe that tight end is one of the more talented positions on this roster. And so when you have talent, you don't want to expose it to the rest of the league. You want to hold on to that talent. And so I think they're going to go with 4 tight ends. Conversely, at running back, I don't think there's enough talent. I think you can cut guys and get them onto your practice squad, so there's no need to keep them on the 53-man roster. So I think there's a 4 versus 3 conversation with both running back and tight end. I elected to go 4 tight ends because I think there's more talent there. And so Zach Ertz, obviously the Wily veteran that they brought in here, is your starter. John Bates is one of the best blocking tight ends in football. He's your second tight end. Ben Sinnott, who they drafted in the second round, I'll shoe in to make this roster as well. He's your third tight end. And this is where things get interesting. If they're keeping a fourth tight end, I think there are two guys vying for one spot, Cole Turner and Amani Rodgers. Amani Rodgers is listed at 225. He may have bulked up to 230, 235, but he got injured, and I think he's still working his way back. And I don't know if he's got the explosiveness back yet that is going to be the separator for him. But I also know that Dan Quinn is a big stickler for physicality in the run game. Not that Cole Turner is the most physical guy in the world, but he is 240 pounds. He has been playing the tight end position now for 3 years. And I do think he's ready to contribute more at the tight end position right now than Amani Rodgers, who essentially has only been playing the position for 2 years and coming off of a major injury. So I just think Cole Turner has the inside track if he is to stay healthy and continue to develop. I think he's a guy that has shown the ability to catch the football. He is an athlete at the position. He's not a stiff there. And I think his ability to have grasped the tight end position a little bit better, and I think be able to block better, frankly, is what ultimately may help him be the fourth and final tight end on this roster. But this easily could be Amani Rodgers. I'm a massive Amani Rodgers fan, but I just think Cole Turner right now has the edge there. And then finally, 10 offensive linemen. This is where you can get to a situation where if you wanted to add a third quarterback, you could shave off one of these offensive linemen and go with 9. If you wanted to go with a fourth running back, you could shave off one of these offensive linemen and go with a fourth running back. If you wanted to go and add a 7th receiver, you could do it here. This is the place where you could go if you wanted to get an extra player at another position. You could shave off one here, trim off some fat, go with 9, and just make sure that you feel comfortable with the level of versatility. And that's what they've been doing in camp. They've been moving guys around to check on the versatility, to make sure that if you're a guard, you can also play center. If you're a tackle, you can play both left and right. They're making sure that if you're a center, you're not just a center, you can play guard as well. That's going to ultimately allow them to keep 9 if they so choose. I think the number is 10, though. I think the number is 10. And I have them in the order of starting line setup, right? So from left to right, offensive line, and then the backup, the second team unit from left to right. So Brandon Coleman right now, rookie third round pick out of TCU, has been with the first team unit 5 days in a row at camp. He started out with the second team, and since the pads have come on, like maybe the practice before the pads came on, started running with the first team offense and has not relinquished that left tackle spot. I think they're really getting comfortable with the idea of him being at left tackle. They did one-on-one drills today. They had a highly competitive practice today at camp. He did not lose a single one-on-one battle at practice. So I think he is really starting to separate himself in this left tackle competition. He's your starting left tackle as of right now. Nick Allegretti has all but sealed up the starting left guard job. They brought him in from Kansas City. Tyler Biadasz was brought in on a 3-year deal, one of the few guys that got a long-term deal in free agency this year. So you know he's starting, coming over from Dallas as at the center position. Sam Cosmi, one of the best right guards in football. He's your starting right guard. Andrew Wiley, I think, is very questionable, but I think he's going to be your starting right tackle when it's all said and done. You go to the second unit. Cornelius Lucas is your first tackle off the bench. He's your starting left tackle with the second team unit. Mason Brooks is a guy that was undrafted out of Ole Miss last year, played center in college, also plays guard, can do both, highly effective. I think they love his physicality and also love the fact that he played in the SEC. I think he's a guy that's going to continue to separate himself. Preseason is going to be big for him, as well as these joint practices. But I think he's a guy that shows that versatility, and I think he's going to ultimately make this roster. Michael Dieter, a guy they signed in free agency as a center to back up Tyler Biadasz, but also can play the guard position. He's, I think, all but locked up a spot here. Chris Paul is a guy that was drafted in the 7th round a couple of years ago out of Tulsa. Can play tackle in a pinch, but he's really a guard at this point of his career. And I think his ability to play both guard positions, not really. And I think he's the one that I look at and say, if they are going to trim off some fat. It'd probably be him because I don't think he plays center at all. So he'd be the guy that you look at and say, okay, may not really need him necessarily. You got enough guys here that can, play guard if need be, but I still think there's value in having Chris Paul on the roster. Hence, he's on my 53-man roster. And then Trent Scott is the other tackle. He's another guy that is a swing tackle, can play left and right, but I think he's more of a right tackle when it's all said and done. And that's what the second unit looks like. And so I think I feel good about those 10 offensive linemen. And that's what I think they're ultimately going to do going into the season. So now we go. So that's your 25 players. Your breakdown: 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs. That's 5. 6 wide receivers. That's 11. 4 tight ends. 15. 10 offensive linemen. That gives you a grand total of 25. We move to the defensive side of the football. And as you can see, it's made up of defensive linemen, linebackers, corners, and safeties. 25 is the number here. So again, that perfect symmetry that you're looking for. It usually does not work out that way, but somehow I was able to get it to fit into that equation. So you start on the defensive line, 9 guys on the defensive line. And I'll tell you about something here, but I've got this set up in the way of edge rushers and then defensive tackles. So Dorrance Armstrong came over from Dallas, signed a 3-year deal. Obviously, he's one of your starting defensive ends. Cleveland Farrell came over from San Francisco in free agency. He's the other starting defensive end. Dante Fowler Jr. Is one of the better pass rushers off the bench. It's rare that we, as Commanders fans, have had a guy that is strictly a pass rush specialist. This is a sight for sore eyes. He's definitely on this team coming over from Dallas with Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. KJ Henry is a fill-in. Okay, he in a normal situation would not make this football team. The only reason he's making this team is because F.A. Obata is currently on the PUP list, recovering from surgery that he had in the offseason. And I don't know when he's going to come off of the PUP list. I don't think he's going to come off the PUP list in time enough to keep KJ Henry from making the football team. But as soon as F.A. Obata is ready and they feel good about him, I think KJ Henry is then bumped down to the practice squad, and KJ Henry's spot will be taken by F.A. Obata when it's all said and done. You go to the defensive tackles, and this is where things get really interesting because they could easily trim off fat here if they wanted to, keep 8 defensive linemen and get rid of one of these defensive tackles. I don't see that happening. They love the rotation of having a bunch of bodies on the defensive line because Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. love to mix in a bunch of different guys, keep them fresh and keep them active. So I think they're going to keep 5 defensive tackles. This is one of the strengths of this football team. You could argue it is the strength of this football team is the defensive tackle position with Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, and Johnny Newton, who they drafted in the 2nd round out of Illinois. John Ridgeway feels really good and safe to me. One of the guys that stops the run extremely well, has carved out a niche for himself as one of the better run stoppers on this team. And then for Darian Mathis, who's been a bit of a disappointment as a 2nd-round pick out of Alabama due to injuries the first 2 years of his career, but he can play football. And I think if he's healthy, he serves a purpose. And I think he makes this football team and rounds out what is one of the deeper positions on the roster. So you have 9 total defensive linemen. You go to the linebacker position, and this is one of the craziest turnarounds I've ever seen as a fan at a position that has been desolate for so long. Rarely do you see this kind of transformation at a position in one offseason when you've been begging for help at this position for like 7 or 8 years. They poured into this position in the offseason. I've got 6 linebackers. Keep in mind, 2 years ago, 3 linebackers made the team. 4 last year, right? Like it was bad at linebacker. And you could argue the 4 guys that made it last year, like 1 or 2 of them couldn't even play, right? So it was bad at linebacker. Now, all of a sudden, this is one of the strengths of the team. It's one of the deeper positions, one of the better positions. The Commanders defensively down the middle from defensive tackle, linebacker, and safety are as stout as it gets. It's linebacker core headed up by Bobby Wagner, obviously the future first ballot Hall of Famer who came in from Seattle this offseason. He's going to lead this group, still playing high-level football. Frankie Louvu signed a 3-year contract, one of the few guys, as I mentioned, with some of the others, Dorrance Armstrong and Tyler Biadasz, who signed 3-year deals. This is a guy that I think has the potential to not only be a Pro Bowler, but potentially an all-pro. He's that good and an underrated signing this offseason. I think he's going to be one of the stars of this defense. Jamin Davis, there's been a lot of scuttlebutt surrounding Jamin Davis as to what his role is going to be on this team. He's been used as a pass rusher primarily in camp to this point, but they did utilize him in OTAs as an off-the-ball linebacker, and head coach Dan Quinn said today at his press conference that they're going to go back to using him in that regard. And so that makes me feel a lot better about his roster spot. I was getting a little nervous if they continue to just put him out there as a situational pass rusher, but knowing that he offers you value as an off-the-ball linebacker on first and second downs, he's a lock to make this roster if they're going to utilize him in that regard. Jordan McGee, their 5th-round draft pick, one of their 5th-round draft picks out of Temple, is a lock to make this team. He's been outstanding in camp thus far, turning heads. Michael Walker, a guy that has experience with Dan Quinn from his Atlanta Falcon days, feels just as good to me as another guy that's going to absolutely make this football team. And Anthony Pittman was really questionable for me. They signed him fairly early on in the process at linebacker as a core special teamer from the Detroit Lions. And I was looking at him like, I don't know if there's a roster spot for you or not, especially after they signed Michael Walker, who came after Pittman. And as camp has gone along, Pittman has become sort of a fixture with the second team. He's a core special teamer, one of the better special team linebackers in the entire NFL. I'm starting to feel like he feels sort of like a lock, and that these 6 linebackers kind of feel like a lock to me at this point. But we'll see if anybody can infiltrate this 6. This feels good. This feels like the most rock-solid position in terms of my projections on this entire roster right now. You get to the defensive backfield. There's 10 total, but we split them into cornerbacks and safety, so 5 and 5. You go to the cornerback position. Emmanuel Forbes Jr., your 1st-round pick from a season ago, starting at one corner. Benjamin St-Juste has had a very strong camp and is playing very well. He's at the other cornerback position. Michael Davis, who they signed from the Los Angeles Chargers in free agency, is also a lock to make this football team. And Mike Sainristil, one of their 2nd-round picks, one of 3 2nd-round picks out of Michigan, is an absolute stone cold lead pipe lock to not only be on the roster, but to be the starting nickel corner. All 4 of those guys are etched in stone. They're on the roster right now. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This last cornerback spot is up for grabs, and there are probably about 4 corners vying for one spot. Noah Igbenogany is the guy that I chose because of his experience with Dan Quinn. He's a core special teamer. They know what he's capable of. They know how he plays, and they know what they're going to get out of him. They also signed James Pierre from the Pittsburgh Steelers in the offseason. Don't sleep on him. There are other guys out there that they've gave looks to in the camp sessions to this point. I wouldn't count out anybody at the cornerback position. It is a wide open 5th and final spot, but I'm going to go with Noah Igbenogany right now because of his special teams prowess and the familiarity that he has with the staff coming over from Dallas. And then finally, safety. You got 5 here. This is, I think, the deepest position on the football team right now. There are 7 safeties, theoretically speaking, that they're choosing from to get 5. And they don't want to cut the 2 guys that they're probably going to have to cut. And you may not get one of them back, right? It's that kind of position. It's very, very talented. It's very, very deep, and it's very, very rich in terms of quality. But I think you have to trim this down to 5 now. Again, as I mentioned, there are other ways to get this to 6. If you're not comfortable exposing a player to waivers in the rest of the league, you can easily get this to 6 by trimming off one of these defensive linemen, by trimming off one of the offensive linemen, right? So there's ways that you can get to 6 safeties if you so choose, but I think the number is 5 right now. Quan Martin, your second round pick out of Illinois last year. They are very high on him. He's already locked in. You can write his name in magic marker right now at free safety. They love him. They haven't been cross-training him at any other positions. They think that this guy has a chance to be one of the better free safeties in all of football, and they haven't been playing him anywhere else. He's starting alongside Jeremy Chin, who they signed in the offseason from Carolina to a one-year deal. They love his versatility. He can play away from the line of scrimmage. He can play around the line of scrimmage where he's probably at his best, playing that pseudo hybrid linebacker position as a safety. He's big, he's fast, he's physical, and he's a lock to make this roster. Derek Forrest, who's kind of a forgotten man, who was a starting free safety the last couple of years. He got injured last year, and it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. But he's back. He's healthy, and I think he's the first guy off the bench. If they go to a three-safety look, I think he's the guy that's going to see the field. And I think he's a guy that gives them really good depth at the safety position. He feels really safe to me as well. Jeremy Reeves, we know, one of the best special teams players in not only the NFC, but in the NFL. This was a all-pro special teams player just a couple of years ago. So we know what this guy is all about, and we know he's a part of this football team. And then Dominique Hampton is a guy that they drafted in the 5th round out of UW, out of Washington, and he's a Jeremy Chin clone. And so they want to continue to work with him. They don't want to expose him to waiver claims. I think all of their draft picks, except for their 7th round pick, Javonte John Baptiste, is going to make the football team. So that includes Dominique Hampton. So I think you hold on to Dominique Hampton, which then puts guys like Percy Butler and Tyler Owens on the chopping block. Now, Tyler Owens was a long shot to make this roster to begin with. I never thought he was going to make this team, but he's been flashing in camp, and he's a height, weight, speed specimen. But I think you can cut him and get him onto your practice squad and continue to develop him. Meanwhile, Percy Butler is interesting because he's talented. I think that he is a guy that if you cut him, you may not get him back. But so such is life. I feel like if it comes down to a guy that they didn't draft, and Dan Quinn and company can say all they want about guys that they drafted versus, guys that were here previous. If it comes down to a guy they drafted versus a guy that they didn't draft, they're going with the guy that they drafted. That's just my personal opinion. And Dominique Hampton, I think, wins out over a guy like Percy Butler. So the breakdown is 9 defensive linemen, 6 linebackers. That gives you a grand total of 15. You add in the cornerbacks, 5 there. That's 20. And then safety, 5 more, 25 defensive players. And then finally, you get to the specialists. 3 guys to finish up the roster. Tressway at punter. There's nothing to discuss there. He's one of the longest tenured commanders and one of the better punters in the league, still doing it at a very high level. Long snapper Tyler Ott was signed in free agency to a multi-year deal from Seattle, so he's a lock to make this football team. We had issues with long snapper last year, so Tyler Ott, his presence here is not to be understated. It's good to have consistency and a guy that has done it in the league for a while at a high level on this roster, because we don't want to talk about long snapper ever again. And then finally, place kicker Riley Patterson was literally signed yesterday. And that's how dire the kicker position feels like on this roster. Now, look, Ramiz Ahmed, who was signed in the wake of the whole issue with Brandon McManus, and ultimately he was cut from the team after the allegations came out about him from last year on the plane over on, going to London and things of that nature. So Washington made a move that they felt like they needed to make by releasing Brandon McManus. They brought in Ramiz Ahmed to be the kicker to kind of hold things down, but it never felt like he was going to be the opening day kicker, the week 1 kicker. And I've said that all along. He had some struggles this week with some kicks. Not that that's why they brought in Riley Patterson. They were going to bring in competition once guys started to get cut from other teams. I wouldn't be shocked if they brought in another kicker at some point, but it feels like if Riley Patterson stays healthy and he does the things that he's done throughout his career, he's been fairly accurate to this point of his career. If he continues to do that, I think he's going to ultimately be the place kicker here. If it's just those two, Ramiz Ahmed and Riley Patterson, I give the leg up to Riley Patterson, who is an NFL veteran who has a roughly 86, 87% career field goal percentage, and only missed 4 extra points in his career, 93 of 97. I think he's going to win out when it's all said and done. But this is to be continued, right? This place kicking situation is by far and away one of the more up for grab positions as we head into the preseason. But I'm going to give Riley Patterson the leg up. So that rounds out the roster right there. If you are there any real projections that you saw there that you didn't see that you think might happen? I'd love to hear about it. But let's get to the comment section real quick and we'll run through some of these. Decab says, Brandon Coleman, I'm excited to see him be our starting left tackle, as am I. I'm really excited to see him getting these reps. Now, again, don't jump the gun, right? We got joint practices against the Jets and the Dolphins. Those are going to be great tests for him to see how he stands up against guys that are of higher quality than the defensive ends that we're trotting out there right now. So he's still got a ways to go, but he's trending towards that. And I think that should make all of us feel really good about, you know, his status and where he's trending right now. Let's see. Anything else here? Zach says, thinking pick up the former left tackle from Green Bay for some competition. You're talking about David Bakhtiari. He's still out there. He's still coming back from injury. I don't see them going outside of the building to address offensive line. I think they feel good about what they've assembled. I think they feel good about either Cornelius Lucas or Brandon Coleman manning up the left tackle position this year. And then we'll reevaluate the position next year. If they need to spend a high-level draft pick on that position next year, they will. If they need to hit free agency to address the position, they will. But I think they've pretty much done what they're going to do as far as the offensive line is concerned. I don't see them doing anything outside. Aramik says Crowder is making the team. I could see Crowder making the team. I told you that last spot is not etched in stone. Those last 2 wide receiver spots are not etched in stone. And if Crowder shows that he's the best punt returner on this team, we know he can play the wide receiver position. Jamison Crowder could easily carve out a niche for himself. They re-signed him this offseason, so that means they value him. How much do they value him? And do they value him enough that someone like Olamide Zaccheaus or even Byron Pringle, who just got here, is off the roster and Crowder is on it? You may be right when it's all said and done. That's one of the guys that I could easily see making his football team is Jamison Crowder. There's probably a spot with his name on it, but right now, I just feel like there are other guys that can do what Jamison Crowder does, and thus he ends up on the outside looking in. But I think he'll end up being on this practice squad if somebody else doesn't pick him up, right? He's a guy that easily could find work elsewhere around the league. Gerard says, definitely feel like they should try to keep Owens. You don't have to keep him. This is the thing about constructing a roster. You keep the guys that you feel like you have to because you run the risk of losing them. You're not going to run the risk of losing Tyler Owens. All 32 teams passed on him, including the Commanders. No one drafted him for a reason. And so you can cut him and get him back onto the practice squad and continue to work with him. So there's no reason to keep him on the roster and potentially expose a guy that might get picked up by a team around the league. I just don't see them doing that. Brant says, wouldn't be surprised if we trade Forrest, Mathis, or Diami for some late round picks. I just don't know if there's value there, right? It's almost like a used car. You could sell it, but what people are willing to pay for it, is it worth more to you to keep it? Does the value of you continuing to keep that car, drive it around the city, keep your new car, with low mileage and not, putting a lot of wear and tear, is it worth more to you to hold on to a Derek Forrest, a Fedarian Mathis, and a De'Ami Brown? Is it worth more to you to hold on to those guys? Do they provide more value being here, or does getting a 7th round pick offer you more value? And again, someone would have to want them as well. Keep that in mind too. Ryan Ellis says, no Ricky Stromberg. No Ricky Stromberg. Now, here's the thing. I think Ricky could beat out Mason Brooks and or Chris Paul, right? Neither one of those spots are locked up. And Chris Paul in particular, Mason Brooks to me feels, and Ricky Stromberg feel like clones of one another because they're both, I think, more naturally centers, but can play guard. I think Mason Brooks has cross-trained at guard way more than Ricky Stromberg, so he's more comfortable at guard, but they're very similar players. Chris Paul doesn't, I don't think, offer you real center value. So he's the one I look at and say, if they're looking to chop someone off, if they're looking to keep Ricky, and Ricky's going to have to prove it, I think Ricky Stromberg can play. And so I need him to prove it, though. He's coming off of a major injury. I just need to see it first. I know what Chris Paul provides. I think Mason Brooks is a guy that they like. I need Ricky to prove that he belongs. If he does that, if I see him in the preseason and I'm like, hey, Ricky looks good, I could see him making this roster. He's another guy. Jamison Crowder, Ricky Stromberg are among the guys that I left off that I'm thinking to myself, they could easily be on this roster. There may be one or two other guys, at corner, James Pierre, some of the other guys, the Penn State corner, there are a couple of guys that could easily end up on this roster, right? The competition is starting to ramp up, and we'll see how some of these guys handle it. But we'll see what happens. But anyway, that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this Louie Tee Network Bleacher Report exclusive 53-man roster projections. It's early, but I feel good about this 53-man roster. Tell me what you think. Leave it down in the comment section. Love to hear your thoughts on the 53-man roster that we have constructed today. We'll be back to talk about this at a later date and time when this thing becomes official and we have the 53-man roster. We'll see how close we actually came. But until then, enjoy the rest of the summer. We got football tonight, right? We're back. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.